This is ZRS, Zenith Radio Syndicate. I'm your host and moderator, Ozell Lilly, and your commander, Totes Newman. Hey, Totes.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, you know.
It's a nice alias you had today.
Likewise.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So that's something we're going to do. I guess every show is we're going to change our alias because we always tend to talk about a lot of deep shit in a subversive manner. And we have certain day jobs and we don't want to, we don't want anybody to sabotage us and take these recordings, to our places of work so we could be vilified for, I don't know, the rest of our lives. What do you think about that? That's how I see it.
It's dangerous out there.
It's very dark and cold.
It's getting colder by the day. It's fucking chilly up in here.
Sorry to hear that, man. I didn't know you were speaking in a literal sense.
I wasn't.
Oh. Yeah, well then you're absolutely right.
Current events! Get them while they're hot!
Yeah, currently there are anti-terror raids being done in France as we speak. ISIS claim responsibility. How many areas around France were attacked?
3?
3, they say around 150 people died?
192. I think
really?
Wow. By now, there's still many people in critical condition. Just devastating.
And there's a lot of talk around how some of these terror suspects sort of migrated in with hundreds of thousands of migrants that recently flooded Europe from Syria. I don't know if it's all Syria. Do you know anything about that? I heard there were other places, and I've heard some people say that a lot of the migrants weren't Syrian.
It's hard to know without being there, like at the crossroads. But immigration from the Middle East to Europe has been going on for decades. And in the most recent decade, there's been happening a lot more because of the increased instability in the Middle East. But within that immigrant exodus that's kind of going on now, apparently ISIS's plan is to sneak some of their operatives in and subvert Western democracies from within to establish an Islamic caliphate spanning the whole world, if you take their words at face value. So it's been happening for a while. It's become a problem very recently, though.
Yes, there was a really interesting article that you emailed me regarding how ISIS threatens to send 500,000 migrants to Europe as a psychological weapon, in a chilling echo of Gaddafi's prophecy that the Mediterranean will become a sea of chaos. Transcripts of telephone intercepts published in Italy claim to provide evidence that ISIS is threatening to send 500,000 migrants simultaneously out to sea in hundreds of boats in a psychological weapon against Europe if there is military intervention against them in Libya. This was back in February 2015, and look where we are right now.
In a very predictable and avoidable situation, that's exactly where we're at right now. There's also a part of it that was entirely predictable and avoidable in the immediate post-9/11 period, where voices of reason warned against excessive involvement in the Middle East and the affairs of the Middle Eastern people for precisely this reason, and nobody listened to them. They were regarded as unpatriotic and un-American or idiotic. It really is terrible to see the ramifications of past mistakes manifest themselves in such a grotesque way when the whole thing could have been avoided. So much life has been lost. The energy of so many people has been wasted on this stupid war on terror, all this factionalism. So many people with potential have been exterminated over nothing.
It is pretty stupid when you or I talk about it, but if you are somebody that uses it as a piece on the grand chessboard, it's pretty fucking genius, don't you think?
Yes.
Because you can prolong it for however long that you want.
Yep, and you can use it as a boogeyman at your beck and call to put fear into the courageous and silence non-believers. It's a great strategy at destroying a planet trying to prosper.
So ISIS would be, if they had any real enemy, it would be the U.S. or it would be, Israel. Why wouldn't they go after Israel? Why would they flood these countries? Because I guess the heads of state are allowing it to happen. Why wouldn't they attack Israel?
I don't think Israel is their main enemy. I think Israel might be the main enemy of the nations in the Middle East who are engaged in land disputes with Israel. But ISIS is kind of engaged in a land dispute with everybody because they're kind of a stateless organization looking for a state to take over. Their battle is kind of with everybody at the moment that doesn't support their vision. Why go after Israel when you can subvert entire continents from within? Why bother with one small state when you could try to leverage your way into several?
They recently hit Paris.
Exactly. And do you remember the Charlie Hebdo situation that happened not very long ago? I mean, it's not even the first time. It's not even new in Europe.
Do you think any of these attacks are actually false flag? There's that whole culture of pretty much every attack is manufactured, every attack is false flag. Obviously, I'm in the school of thought that it's, both. What do you think about both of those attacks in Paris being false flag or not?
I think it's easy to speculate, but hard to know. I could see possible motives for either one. As far as any concrete suggestive evidence, I haven't seen any about this newest one. Charlie Hebdo thing was a strange turn of events. But then again, I don't ultimately see that state governments or institutions, well, I guess aside from the military-industrial complex, have a whole lot to gain from such a rogue enterprise as ISIS, unless they control it. If they totally control it, then it's good for them. But if it's something that has gotten out of their control, then it would be a major threat to their alleged dominance, their hegemony.
I think there is evidence that does point towards the West actually funding ISIS and giving them weapons, or in a lot of cases leaving millions if not billions of dollars of weapons for them to use in Iraq, which is crazy. That seemed extremely comical idiocy to me, thinking that it's really fucking intentional.
Sure.
Like, why would they leave all that shit there?
Yeah, for them to get it. It's just hard to know the motive of the end game for the CIA or the Mossad or whoever the other organizations would be interfering in it.
Well, we talked about it on the previous show. It's just mainly for geopolitical purposes.
Well, I mean, what they would have wanted ISIS to do with those guns in particular, because we also have a history of arming warlords against each other, so they'll destroy each other. So it's hard to say whether it was part of a plan to diminish them or a plan to aggrandize them is speculation. But I wouldn't put anything past the military-industrial complex and its intelligence agencies, but I also wouldn't put anything past people who relish a chance to behead somebody.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't either. So this is just one attack. I guess this is the second one. There was one in Beirut, which nobody talked about which was caused by ISIS. I'm not really sure how many people died. I think it was around 40, 50. Nobody talked about that. Instead of everybody's painting their Facebook profile pictures and the France flag. Did you do that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I could see just being a tool like a yard away, like from doing that.
But that conformity is gold.
It is.
Social capital.
It's amazing how people can't see the foolishness behind that. I mean, no offense to y'all, but
but is there like a less substantial thing that you could possibly do to show your support, or the way it made you feel, or the way you're reflecting on life's ridiculousness and brutality occasionally? Is there anything more trivial that you could do about it than put some dumb prepackaged filter on a photo of yourself? Like, who gives a shit? What inconsequential crap. Like, I think in the wake of tragedy, it makes me more steely-minded about dumbass symbolic gestures that only serve to make us feel like we were there, or that it happened to us, and that we participated in some cultural event. I don't care if people get offended. Maybe the next time, I don't know.
Aside from that, there was, you know how I found out about the Paris attacks? I just got back home, like driving back from New Mexico, and I pulled up my phone, and then I got a Facebook notification, and it said, "Your friend such and such is marked safe in the Paris terror attacks." I was like, "What the fuck?" So my friend, he actually has lived in Paris for a couple of years now, and I saw it, and it had 80 likes. I thought I was happy that he was safe, but I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, you have, like I said, I'm very happy that he's safe. Love the guy to death, but it was just weird that, there were terror attacks in Beirut. I have a few friends in Beirut. Why didn't I get a fucking notification about them?
Sure, yeah.
That just with the whole school of thought on the flag, but yeah, a bunch of people liked it. You fucking liked it. That's great. So it serves as like another validation for them. Well, oh yeah, I got a friend in Paris, and I'm glad that he made it. It serves to make them feel better about themselves. It seems.
It does.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it definitely serves that function. And there's also something else about that feature that is interesting to me, since you bring it up. They would have had to have already coded that into their system in order to roll it out like that after something like this happens. Because I do some coding, not very well, but
really?
But I've been exploring it. If you get something as vast as Facebook to send an automatic text message based on someone's location to all their friends, you've got to design an operation in your database that does that, or that triggers that, or that performs that mechanism. So this would have already had to be coded before the tragedy, and then they were just looking for maybe a time to roll it out. It's very strange.
Well, I mean, algorithms are, it's pretty common.
Yeah, but like, do you remember after 9/11, it's not exactly a very good analogy, but the kind of introduction campaign is similar. Like right after 9/11, they produced this Patriot Act, this immense document, like 3,000 pages long. There's no way that was written between 9/11 and the day they introduced that, which was like a month later. It would have had to be in the works for a long time. So, did Facebook know there was going to be something going on and program a safety check?
Well, it is a CIA asset. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. There are shady sources involved in the Facebook finances. But it's interesting that they already had this feature programmed for this situation.
Do you know if they used it on maybe a previous terrorist attack or a natural disaster or anything as such?
As far as I know, this is the first usage of it.
Yeah. Did you actually see it yourself?
I did not get one.
Like on your Facebook?
I don't have any French friends.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I could have been there. Getting that text message myself.
You could have had that part of history in your life, but you didn't.
Nope.
But so with all that said, in regards to the double standard of, Paris getting more attention than Beirut. Beirut's an awesome fucking city. Very, very underrated. So if somebody's like, "Oh, I don't give a shit about Beirut," you should travel and you're a dumbass. Like, you don't know anything. Stay in Brooklyn, stay in fucking Texas, and die. I think double standards like that sort of illustrate how attached people are to maybe their own cultures or their own race or their own skin color in a lot of ways. And that's kind of to be expected. That's like a genetic thing, don't you think? Not a genetic thing, but I mean, we talked about this before. You're going to have more sympathy for somebody who looks like you, who has your same beliefs, your same culture, than somebody who doesn't. And that kind of played itself out with the whole double standards of terror bombings in Beirut and Paris and who got more attention. I mean, what do you think?
I think partially yes. But I think also the nature of the events were a little different.
There were more.
But this was like a rock concert, people getting picked off one by one. I think bombings are quick, immense blast, very destructive in that first moment. But something that carries out, prolongs the trauma, and maybe has a bigger impact in the collective psyche when it's coupled in with the fact that it's someone of a similar race to you or a similar part of the Western civilization. I think there's two things coming together there.
I mean, sure, but this is just one example of that, and it's happened previously. It's hard to get into it with all the inertia of life and news stories that go in and out of your head with the internet age. But I think people are more inclined and more sympathetic with their own races and cultures and all that. And I think, when this is actually brought out, especially in social media, people, they understand it more, and they realize that they kind of acted like tools for maybe a couple of minutes. It's not exposed. That information isn't, out there readily.
Yeah.
Until somebody, puts it out there.
Yeah.
And that's, one of the great things about the internet.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that there was probably also a difference in the coverage of the bombing in Beirut than there was in the melee in France. Because we're sold things differently. Some things we pay more attention to because they've been shoved in our faces. People paid a lot of attention to Anna Nicole Smith dying, but they didn't give a shit about Anna Nicole Smith. You couldn't escape it. That's all anyone wanted to talk about. So that's all anyone thought there was to talk about. But yeah, they didn't care about her. That's not why. It had nothing to do with her race. So I think there's a lot of variables in life, and reducing them to the race variable, I think, is risky business and unscientific a lot of times.
Right, definitely.
Religion, on the other hand,
let's get into it.
Extremism can be a very brutal enterprise. Very brutal indeed. Sometimes our religious affiliations come before a sanctity of life ethic that is maybe more secular. Sometimes a religious notion of what is just is something we hold higher than due process, innocence before proven guilty, let the punishment fit the crime. All the things that have led to an increasingly peaceful society. People's religious affiliations can lead them to treat other people who are not of that religious affiliation like morally inferior beings. Another huge double standard at that point. And you know we hate double standards. Our actions are often a byproduct of our thoughts. And if we embody a certain thought pattern that has destructive effects, we're going to end up with our body carrying out destructive impact on the world around us. And there are destructive aspects to every ideology that there is. I just look out my window here and I see too many ideologies and too few critical examinations of them. I think if there's a sect of a religion that is wreaking havoc on all those who encounter it, you have to acknowledge that. You can't judge everyone according to their actions. You can judge the actors themselves based on the things they've done. But you can't
Right.
put everyone else in that box with the extreme actors because it's convenient for your imagination.
Right.
But you can't turn a blind eye to evildoers. That's the easiest way for us all to rot from within, is to let evil prevail and do nothing to stand up to it, nothing courageous in the name of virtue as we see it.
Absolutely. So earlier we were talking about ISIS sending 500,000 migrants into Europe. Along with that link you sent me, the Clash of Civilizations theory by the political scientist Samuel P. Huntington in a 1992 lecture at the American Enterprise Institute.
Yes.
Fascinating stuff. But why don't you go into it for a bit for people who don't know about it?
Well, it's basically an idea that the coming era of human engagement as a global society will be defined by an ideological struggle between people of the Western traditions and people of the Eastern traditions, excluding like Buddhism and people who don't really conflict with anybody. They improve themselves from within. But the ideologically entrenched factions and their conflicts with each other will be of such a character that it'll be a defining feature of the coming age. The idea, and there's a book that came after the lecture. The book was written in 1996, and it seems almost prescient in its foresight of the coming decades.
How did he? How did he get so spot on with like how like small the world would get? Because I guess the internet was still in its inception, but was anybody aware that the internet would get or would make the world such a small place?
Yes, many people, but mostly social critics, people who saw the rate of development in the communication industries as a development that would negate distance that used to keep people apart from each other.
He didn't talk about that, though.
That's not where he was coming from. He just says
a smaller world.
Right. What he was seeing was that as these value systems have changed over time and evolved and devolved at equal measure over the last 1,500 years, they've become very incompatible if you compare both the Protestant paradigm and the secular humanist paradigm. If you put those side by side with moderate Islam, then I think you can find people who get along, agree on the basic moral questions, and can live in peace together in prosperous communities. But if you get people who are particularly obsessed with taking these things literally, then they'll be at each other's throats and will be unable to share space together and will be unable to find compromise that doesn't involve body counts, collateral damage.
This has been going on for quite some time now in Europe. They say that in Britain, the Englishman or the white man will be the minority. It's astounding how many, Moroccans and Algerians and Middle Eastern people are in France or Germany. But with this new wave of migrants, they say it's the largest crisis since the Second World War, migrant crisis. How many years of people is that worth if they were to just normally go through the whole immigration process? How many, is it like 10 years ahead? And that
It's hard to say. It's a shitload. And it's all at once, which makes it tough to process thoughtfully. If
Right.
there's a steady stream that didn't overwhelm the system all at once, it'd be easier, more manageable to do the right way. But since it's
Right.
all at once overwhelming the apparatus in place that's there to deal with those things, it's a lot of people. And also that's compounded with the fact that birth rates in industrialized Western nations are declining. So you're coupling a declining birth rate with a exodus from elsewhere, and it's going to fundamentally change the local environments very much. And then the question becomes, so if there's this clash of civilizations going, do you really want that clash of civilizations to occur on your block? Or would you rather it occur a continent away? Because generally the population centers of Western civilization are in set areas, and the population centers of the Muslim world have a central geography to them. But if you diffuse all of these people throughout the world, not just the Islamic migration, but any refugee group whatsoever, if we continue to diffusely spread them throughout the world, then this clash of civilizations will take place locally instead of at the global scale between nations, where there's a lot
Right.
less collateral damage.
Are they accepting any migrants into the U.S.? I did hear a figure of 10,000 that Obama's may let in.
They are.
10,000?
I don't know. It's a government issued statistic, so I think that says it all.
That's there you go. There you go. Who's the person that vets them? Who's head of that department?
It's probably the Department of State, and that would be John Kerry.
Kerry.
How comforting of a thought.
John Kerry.
It's so secret we can't even talk about it.
No, I don't want to say that.
Speaking of Yale, I'm just kidding.
Speaking of,
Because that's where Skull and Bones is.
where did Kerry go to school? He went to Yale.
Yeah, he was in Skull and Bones with Bush. Remember around
With
that?
Bush?
Oh yeah, same graduating
Same class?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So they knew each other really well.
They've known
didn't
each
they?
other all their lives since they were 20, probably even before then.
Wow.
Yeah, and they end up being
So
two
it's-
people squaring off in an election.
I know. So it's like it was all pre-planned or something. I mean, maybe not pre-planned, but they're in a club.
For it to be a coincidence would be almost mathematically unfathomable. Yeah.
But they were part of the same club, and maybe that's why. Like, it was just decided at some point. Not when they were actually in school together, but Skull and Bones is like a club you're in forever, you know?
Absolutely. And they have some interesting rituals, to say the least.
What are they?
I believe one of them involves getting naked, recounting your entire sexual history while masturbating, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they're masturbating.
Like, all of them masturbate, or just the dude?
Yeah, just
telling his entire...
just the initiate.
And then they're all just, like, watching him masturbate?
And listening to every sexual experience and thought he's had that he can recall.
While he's, like, butt-ass
Yeah.
naked?
Just beating off like
Jesus.
I don't know, like an orangutan.
And they're all wearing, like, cloaks and shit?
Or Baphomet heads. Who knows? Who knows what they're wearing? I think there's also one where you have to like sleep in a coffin. It's symbolic of some sort of resurrection. People speculate that's what George Bush means when he says he's born again, instead of in the Christian sense. It's just funny food for thought. Hard to know.
There you go.
It just could be rumor, but
well, speaking of Yale,
Well, are we done with ISIS yet?
What do you think?
sometimes software is not compatible with certain other operating systems. The software we use to solve legal disputes in this country and in similar Western democracies, I use democracies loosely, that is not compatible with the operating system in the mind of a jihadist. Freedom of speech, political freedom in general, is a software, a program that people can run in their operating system. But look how difficult it's been to force those values on other countries. We keep trying it, but it doesn't succeed. It's very hard to force our value system on other people because they've got a different operating system. They've got an entire different history.
You don't do it through a democracy, through the barrel of a gun. You can't do it that way.
Well, no, but you can't even do it by democracy either, because democracy reflects the will of the majority, and if the majority doesn't already think that way, then democracy's not going to do it either.
And what about in Iran and Mossadegh? I mean, that was
that was very self-initiated democratic loosening, and it was awesome. It was a great development for that country. Unfortunately, we
but
killed
it was ruined
exactly
by the West.
Sure was. That's painful to think about.
I can't help. I think it's wrong to think that the Muslim or the Eastern world is incapable of achieving a political liberal society. I think there are a lot of people in those countries who want that, who really want that.
Very much so.
The reason why the Middle East is in the situation is because of empire, because of divide and conquer. These countries where how they're arranged is completely unnatural.
Yes.
Of how it should be. Like if you look at a map now, then like from a World War II map, it was or a World War I map, it was fundamentally different, and maybe even before that, it was I guess unnatural.
Correct.
Because it's been continuously divided up.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the old Roman war strategy, divide and conquer.
Yeah. But Iran did not opt for a more democratic society in the 1800s. It only happened in the 1950s when America was able to export the strength of its principles, not the strength of its military. That's the way to bring people into accordance with the value system that you believe in. You advocate for it. You prove and demonstrate its qualities and virtues.
Right.
So I think that's great. I think all that is great, and absolutely, overwhelming majority of Muslims are not violent people at all. I've never met a violent Muslim, ever. And I've met a lot of them. I've met mostly profound people who want to live peacefully and in harmony with the people around them, just like most human beings of any kind. But there's like a contagion of thought patterns that destroy that human impulse that people have to live in concert with others.
Right. It's not as if the West has any ownership over the ideals of a free society or democracy.
No ownership.
Everybody wants that.
But they didn't necessarily want it before it had been demonstrated to be effective. Like there was a time when pretty much only America was willing to try it. And even then, they weren't willing to try it for everybody. They were willing to try it for a protected class of landowners.
Right.
It was a very radical and dangerous and globally it would have been a very unpopular idea at the time. But it was the right combination of Catholic suppression and Protestant work ethic that kind of made it stick here first.
Right.
The fruits of these values are often apparent. They don't need armed enforcement. They don't need anything mandated. There's nothing to enforce about a good idea.
Right.
And anyone can have one if we remove the things that prevent us from accepting them and from moving on from bad ideas to which we've committed ourselves. I see tons of Americans who don't value these principles at all. I mean, it's not even just people abroad that have a hard time seeing the benefit of classical notions of liberal society, the open society, the free society. I see mostly tyrants walking the streets. They just don't have any claim to the throne, but they have all the mindset of it.
I see a lot of them are like that. Most people don't talk like you and I do, or our friends.
Yeah.
It's the tyranny of the masses, is what it is.
And the tyranny of the narcissistic way which we view ourselves as well. Like,
That's true.
the world revolves around my desires, my impulses, my value judgments, and it's something for me to inflict on the world. And everyone's trying to control something that is not their prerogative, trying
Right.
to tyrannize something. Not everyone's trying to tyrannize everyone. Some people are. But everyone's trying to tyrannize someone or something or themselves.
Right. Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you.
So, you were still going on about Mr. Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.
Well, that makes it a very bad time to have a wave of immigration, doesn't it? If that is the best metaphor for the situation, is a clash of civilizations, it's a very bad time to have mass immigration. Because then the
Absolutely.
conflict is going to be ubiquitous instead of defined to one geographic center that can be avoided. Like, if you don't want to live in the Middle East right now, and I don't, why would you want the Middle East to come to your neighborhood, and your doorstep? Not because of any racist reasons, but because there are social problems that have not been addressed. I think multiculturalism in a society at war is potentially quite dangerous, and I think multiculturalism in a time of peace and collaboration and mutual acceptance, that would be a very productive thing for people. But during a time of warfare, during a time of strife, during a time of no compromise, it seems like a really bad time for these two things to be happening.
You know, a lot of people would ask, where are these people supposed to go when, we have our Western powers bombing them back to the Stone Age? Shouldn't we start with, maybe we should, get them to stop bombing these countries so they can go back to their homes?
Yes.
Is that the fundamental problem?
Yeah. The fundamental problem is that the list of provocations thus far is about endless, practically. You mentioned Mossadegh in 53, but it goes before that. It goes back to the time of the Crusades. Yeah, there's a long list of potential grievances that people who want to live a self-determined life in the Middle East would have against the United States. I personally am no fan of this country's foreign policy going back as far as forever.
I know
yeah,
it. I know
yeah.
it.
There's no reason that humanity should have ever ended up on this spiral. The only reason it is because some generals and some elitists wanted to maintain a hegemony and didn't want a multipolar world with more than one world power after World War II. They didn't want to have to coexist with someone who had as much say and sway as the United States did. So they've gone to hell and back to prevent another world power from rising to compete with us but the human toll to accomplish that goal has been devastating, and we've lost countless lives and ideas and thoughts and contributions that could have been made to solve the problem, or other problems, really. If we didn't get so bogged down in trying to solve this one for the last 60 years, we could have probably solved fucking some other problems by now. Right. We wouldn't be stuck in this mud.
I don't see any good coming out of any of this. I mean, there's going to be more terror attacks, and then when that happens, the more these migrants are going to be ostracized, the more people are going to want foreign intervention in other countries. I just don't see anything good happening to the people of the Middle East, and with all this, I'm kind of scared.
Kind of scared, kind of depressed, kind of numb. It's such a multi-fucked situation. Because there's nowhere else for them to go. Because they can't improve their countries from within because of the amount that we interfere to prevent their countries from improving from within. Because if they improve their countries to reform them in the way that they would like their countries to manage themselves, then that would threaten U.S. interests in the region, and threatening U.S. interests in the region threatens U.S.'s interests on a global scale, because that's kind of the breadbasket for the world. Since the beginning of recorded history, pretty much, the people who control Central Eurasia, basically, whoever controls that area controls the fate of billions. So there's no way to improve the country from within. There's nowhere to go because people are going to be worried about jihadists planted within the refugees. Africa could have been an option, but Gaddafi isn't alive anymore, and he was trying to do some really good things for the African continent as far as independence from the world order.
Like with the currency?
Yeah, and the
gold dinar?
Yeah, and the mutual defense to sort of get out from under NATO's thumb. Because NATO has been no friend of sovereign nations over the years.
So, why do they have him killed? Like, for that purpose?
It seems that way to me, because he could have... Well, a rising tide lifts all boats. If you can raise the quality of life continent-wide, then that could have been a pressure release valve for a lot of these escalating conflicts.
Right. It seemed to me he was the enemy for a good while. I mean, ever since Reagan killed one of his daughters or something in an airstrike, and then, after Iraq happened, I guess he got a little scared at Saddam being pulled out of a hole, and I guess he sort of came around to NATO and even met up with Prime Minister Blair at one point.
I remember that, yeah. And he said he was getting rid of all of his weapons of mass deception. I mean, all of his weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, after...
Right.
But that's because...
And after that...
That's because he had the exact same deal with the U.S. government and State Department that Saddam had. Like a friendly autocrat. We'll put you in power if you do these certain things to further our interests in the region. But it turns out that he was a little more of a free thinker and a free agent than they wanted him to be, and he came up with some ways to do some real pragmatic, realistic reforms for the people on that continent. They went out of their way to make him seem like the most insane, volatile maniac.
Right.
But he's a very eccentric guy and a very colorful personality. So that helped. They portrayed that in a very misleading way, but he really seemed like he did care about the people of that continent. Yeah, not only his people but other people as well. Yeah. And that's why they had to get rid of him so badly that they supported Al Qaeda in Libya to get rid of him. They're like, we'd rather have like unabashed jihadist faction running this country than this guy who's trying to do good things for his people.
Right.
Speaks volumes. From the Peace Prize president.
So, why isn't Africa an option? I mean, obviously there's not Libya. Well, I don't know how tolerant the government is there now. They're, from what I hear, they're pretty crazy, pretty nuts. So, I mean, half of Africa is, it's Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
Why not Africa? Why not Africa?
It's a very good question. I don't know. Why not? It doesn't make sense. It's a lot closer than New Orleans.
Not that far away. That's such a good question. Like, why are they being directed to European countries?
I think we got the part of the answer there in February of 2015 from ISIS. I mean, we know their incentive for directing emigration to Europe.
Right.
But what I don't understand is what Europe thinks it's doing or getting out of this.
Do you think they're part of the problem in the sense that they want this?
It's hard not to conclude that. But I don't really know what the EU thinks it's doing, because it seems like it's just throwing darts at a board full of Post-it notes that says, let's try this weird idea. The EU is very... I don't know. I've thought about it a lot. I don't know what the countries in question think the upshot is of this wave of immigration. I can see the costs. I can't see necessarily the benefits other than fulfilling a multicultural agenda that they've committed themselves to a long time ago in the abstract. So maybe when it comes time to put their ideas to action, they might be doing that. But I see tons of times when politicians are completely unwilling to put their alleged ideas to action. They'd rather just change their ideas and obfuscate and deny than actually put their ideas into action a lot of times. So I remain baffled.
Their jobs are to put the real people in power's ideas into action.
Yes. But then you'd have to conclude that if this is their wish, then their wish is to cause a lot of problems. And then that still leaves one baffled as to why they want to cause so many domestic issues. Maybe because they're the ones that people will call on to fix them. It could be a way for EU to gain a lot of legitimacy. It's kind of lacked in a lot of people's eyes so far, is that there's this continent-wide problem. We're a continent-wide organization, and you need us to solve it. And then you'll believe in us forever, because we bailed you out that one time. Just very Machiavellian and dark, however we have to look at it.
Yeah. I was at the video store not too long ago, and I saw Children of Men on the stand, and I couldn't help think of like some parallels.
Oh yeah,
to
man.
Today, or to at least to the future, like of Europe. I guess one of the themes that they pressed on with that whole movie was just a massive exodus of Muslims and Middle Easterners.
Yep.
If you
but
remember.
If you also
were...
did you watch it recently?
No, not recently. I really want to. I actually own it, but I don't have it with me.
Like, they also detail a fundamental loss of liberty alongside with that immigration. They show you all these detention centers and people in dog cages being processed. Like, one comes with the other. If you have an unmanageable population or a difficult to manage population, you're going to see the population managers going to the extreme. We're always going to end up with less freedom as long as we stay in the back seat watching other people drive the apparatus. The cost of these decisions are going to continually be pushed to people who did not make these decisions. They're going to outsource the negative consequences to people like you and me while maintaining and even growing their power base so they can do more nefarious machination.
It's going to be worse for people who look like me, people who walk around in Britain, call themselves like vigilante Sharia patrol. I'm gonna be sort of meshed in with that because I sort of look like them, you know.
Well, rest assured that English people are probably already the most racist people on Earth. Oh yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Well, probably because of like that, because of the mass
Well,
immigration.
no,
there.
for centuries,
Or
stemming from their aristocracy, the value system of the aristocracy, to their world empire they had back in the day. That's where the idea of Darwinism emerged, which in Darwin's Origin of Species, he actually has a list of races from most evolved to the least evolved. So that's a very racist document from the beginning, and they've kind of always believed in the superiority or inferiority of people based on the condition of their birth.
wow, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, the slave trade that existed in America was an extension of British economic practices of the time. And a vast majority of the colonies in the early Americas were established by British expats, and they upheld all of these same traditions that Britain was doing worldwide. British people were enslaving Aborigines in Australia and pretty much doing the exact same thing we were doing here all over the world. Those are the people in America that did it. It was the English segment of settlers that upheld the whole racist slave tradition. The first slaves in the Americas actually were Irish people that were kidnapped from their houses and stolen from families and separated in a very similar way that later happened with the African slave trade.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah. And at the bottom of Darwin's list of least evolved races was the Irish. He thought there was no one lower. I mean,
Are you serious?
yeah, that fully represented English people, their mindset at the time. There's nothing lower than an Irish person. It's not like they regarded anyone else very highly either, though. So if you're making an experiment, don't use England as the control for a racist study. They've already committed themselves to being dicks.
Yeah,
Many years ago.
Wow. Well, I just thought that Britain has had. I always thought it had a decent assimilation of like other cultures there, but I guess no, they haven't.
Never really. Yeah.
Would you say that we're probably the least racist country in the West?
I would. Maybe Canada.
Yeah.
But I don't think Canada has the same demographic blend that we do.
Right. I don't think so either.
Yeah, it's not really knowable until it's tested. America is the most diverse place on planet Earth. We've still got a pretty high crime rates and episodes of extreme intolerance. But it's never been tested like this. And people are doing fairly admirably at it more often than not. We're kind of the leading test case on whether people can look beyond the circumstances of their birth and examine each other for who they are.
Right. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
It is, and it's got to be held onto, and it's got to be stood up for and advocated for and not taken for granted, because that's something that allows so much further progress to be possible. It's a necessary condition to accomplish the rest of the things we need to accomplish. The more superficial we become, the less we are able to see each other for who they are. Because if we're superficial, we're shallow, all we see is what someone looks like on the outside. If you look like a Turkish guy, I have some association in my head about what I think Turkish people are like, or people in the Middle East are like, and I'll just throw you in there with everybody because it's unimaginative and I'm shallow. And then we'll have lost so much of that tolerance through our desire to label and judge each other.
Have you, by the way, read Origins of the Species, like in its entirety?
Not cover to cover. I don't think so. I've read sections at various points.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm familiar with the content, but I couldn't write you a doctorate level thesis.
Well, what do you think of Darwinism as an explanation
Of
humankind and why we are the way we are, how we evolved?
I think it's bullshit.
You think it's bullshit?
I think it's bullshit.
What do you think of ilk like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, who sort of peddle the whole theory?
Well, Dawkins, by trade, is an evolutionary biologist. So if he doesn't double down on the theory of evolution, then he's wasted his fucking education.
Right.
So it's like someone who studies, gender studies telling you that everything is a gender problem.
Right.
It's the guy with a hammer telling you everything is a nail. And I think he's very selective about evidence, about things he discusses. I've never heard him be able to adequately explain many of the concerns about evolutionary theory. And one thing nobody has ever seen in the evolutionary process, and thus is completely unproven, is how something could go from being one species to another. It makes a lot of sense how one species can adapt this characteristic or that characteristic through many generations, but it has never been illustrated or observed how a fish could become a mammal, for example, or how the evolution from single-celled organism through the various scales of life form, like reptilians, sea creatures, then birds and mammals and all that, they kind of came about allegedly in some successive order through the continual evolution of a single species that branches out into different areas. And it's a magical supposition, but it's pure speculation.
Why do they peddle it as truth?
Because it's better than the other prevailing theory of creationism. We confuse being better than this other idea for meaning this is true.
Creationism in the sense of
the world was made 6,000 years ago. Satan planted the dinosaur bones to test our faith. The creationism of evangelical Christians, for example.
Right. Okay.
That stuff is even more speculative, even less sensible.
Well, there's that, but I always thought evolution was sort of put out there in schools to sort of suppress other theories of how we came to be, why we are the way we are. There's the whole theory of those giants that the Smithsonian has been covering up.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about that?
Yeah.
There was a TED Talk on it.
There's a lot of things in the fossil record that disprove or suggest things counter to Darwinism. Like there's people there's been skeletal remains found in layers of rock that are 3 million years old.
So what are they getting at by not telling us this stuff and say, well, look at this bullshit over here, believe that? Why are they doing what the evangelicals are doing?
On one hand, they might be openly, willingly deceitful. They might know their ideas are not true, but they keep spouting them because it's given them some sort of platform to earn money and spread influence. Or there's the other hand where they've already made up their mind. They're examining the evidence and only confirming their own biases. Or they're not that smart and can't even comprehend the arguments against. One of the three, I can't say. Probably some combination of all of it.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And there's also a worldview involved that is informed by Darwinism. It stops people from questioning certain things about the historical timeline if they think people have only been people for 70, 100,000 years.
That's a big one.
Yeah, they won't examine the things that appear in the geological record to have happened much earlier than that. And things that change notions of how we got here, where we came from, that might change our notions of where we're going and where we possibly could go that we haven't considered yet. There's a possibility that we are just repeating a script that's been repeated on this world for many times now.
There could be like 20 or infinite versions of Totes Newman right now.
Well, maybe not like alive at the same time, but there could have been people like me in many past historical eras doing the exact same things that I do, and failing to stop history from repeating itself. I mean, it seems that we have a never-ending series of great civilizations and the ruins they have left when they fall. That's what we were finding in the historical records, that there's been seemingly a lot more great civilizations rise and fall than we are commonly led to believe. It seems like that's been happening for a lot longer than simple Darwinist evolution suggests.
Right.
Check your privilege.
So you sent me a few links regarding some shenanigans that are going on in a bunch of colleges. It started out with the University of Missouri, and looks like it's very race conscious. Little race baiting here and there. I know. I don't know if it's relatable, but there's also been a little bit of it here in SMU with sororities not letting black ladies in. I don't know if you heard about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what's the situation in Missouri, and how did it blow up into other colleges sort of following the same sort of movement? Like, what is it all about? What's going on here?
Well, for the last few months, there have been incidents of isolated racial epithets, which produced a heightened sense of inquiry into the nature of race relations at the University of Missouri. Then, in the past week, someone in a dorm found a swastika made out of poop in a dormitory bathroom.
I read that. I was like, that was definitely one of the most memorable ones for me from that article.
Yes. So in response to some inebriated people using the N-word, swastika made of fecal matter, there's been a hunger strike, there's been disruption of classes, there's been a published list of demands, there has been student activists denying the freedom of the press while disrupting classes, demanding the president resign and be terminated for allowing freedom of speech and rights accorded to citizens under due process. They are demanding things like free higher education, $15 minimum wage for students, zero tolerance policies regarding the expression of unpopular opinions, employment quotas at the university based on race, mandatory social justice curriculum and funding of campus social justice centers to increase, in quotes, visibility and awareness, in quotes, access to safe spaces, acknowledgments of white privilege, and resignations of people who didn't do any of the things they're upset about. They're calling for the president to resign, and he resigned today, I believe, because he didn't ban free speech, and because he didn't, I don't know, I mean, if they knew who made the poop swastika, they would have charged him with a crime. It's not like that was exactly legal. It was juvenile. It was stupid. It's not like he was given a hero's welcome and a free pass and a pat on the back by the institution saying, thanks for reflecting my specific values.
It's also an insult to whoever made the poop swastika, because your swastika is made out of poop.
Yeah. Since when have people made symbols they revere out of poop? I thought that was a sign of a lack of reverence, like that statue of the Virgin Mary made out of poop that made that uproar in New York around the turn of the millennium.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Anyway,
yeah, like I don't see Christians having poop crosses, or I don't see Darwinists having their little poop Darwin fish,
or Muslims having, poop moon and star crescents.
Yeah, nope, I don't. No, it's strange.
Doesn't happen. No.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things that I've heard of their demands, they also want faculty based on their race and color. Is that correct?
It is correct, yeah.
That's messed up.
It's messed up, though, because of its content and the effects of that idea.
Well, I would rather prefer somebody who has a strong grasp of that content that they're teaching, as opposed to their color being a deciding factor. I mean,
absolutely.
If you have like a tie and maybe both of them understand the content pretty well, one of them is white, one of them is black, and having a different background than the conventional background, I guess it would be nicer to take that person, but to solely do it off of color, It's kind of stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, and counterproductive because people are still that you're just incentivizing people to see you for your race characteristics. Moving beyond that is really the only way forward. If a college has to have 10% black employees, then they'll be regarded as the token black employees, and people will call into question, does this person have this job on merit? When if they were hired based on merit in the first place, no one would even have to think twice about whether they're there because they're race or because they're merit. It furthers the racial problem when we continue to base things on race. If it solved the problem, then it's worth consideration. But if it doesn't solve the problem, what point would it be to institute that reform? I don't think it would solve the problem.
You don't think it would solve the problem?
If you have to mandate a 10% black faculty and staff, then the people you hire are going to feel like a black professor or a black administrator. Then their race has to continue to be a part of their professional identity. The idea is for a professor to be a professor based on grasp of the curriculum without having to be a black professor or a Hispanic professor or a white professor or a midget professor.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, a lot of these quotas already exist in the abstract, because if you don't have enough enough people from underrepresented communities at your place of employment, someone's gonna get outraged. They're gonna assume you're a racist employer if you don't hire any minority individuals whatsoever. But it's the things like the mandatory social justice curriculum and the mandatory funding of social justice centers
That's crazy.
that are going to continue to inflict a damaging worldview on a generation of young minds. The essence of what's going on here.
That's probably the worst part about it. Like, as far as what they want.
Yeah, the efforts to start a re-education of America, in a way. There's no incident that happened that has merited anything close to that kind of reaction. There was a drunk guy who wandered into a dorm and called a group of people the N-word, which is extremely juvenile behavior that I don't think very many people would endorse at all. And then a poop swastika of a very dubious nature. And then as a result of that, we've got to institute this Orwellian re-education program.
I wonder if we dealt with anything like this in college. I don't really remember it being anything this bad.
Like, people were already kind of resistant to ideas they didn't hold themselves. And universities were and always have been far left leaning.
Yeah.
But we didn't see this. We saw the version of this that was grounded in the reality. It's mutated in that short time to better reflect the new crop of pampered young adults. There's a disturbing need to be validated. You hear that pop up from the demonstrators from time to time. I feel you're invalidating what I'm saying, or I feel like you're invalidating me when blah blah blah. You have to go out there and validate yourself. You've got to validate yourself. That's your job.
Yep.
That's only your job. It's nobody else's. You have 70 years in which to do it. You have plenty of time. You've got to start by at least being secure enough in yourself so that you become immune to these microaggressions and slights and soft triggers. People who crave validation from outside sources rarely receive it. And when they do receive that validation, it's still not enough, because you're still going to be waiting for that next bit of congratulation and validation. You have to cultivate your own validity from within, and then it cannot be deprived from you. You have to have the courage to harvest that sense of self-acceptance. So you not just pray for the world while you're waiting for it to turn you on and say, good job, or yes. The world is going to say mostly no to everybody. It's one thing to kind of have that juvenile sense of self-worth when you're 18, 19.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's going to become a time in all of these students' lives where there's not going to be anyone to hold their hand apart from the state, and there's going to be no one to petition for safety except the state. And that's the kind of situation of permanent childhood that we're stuck in. What happens to people when they continue to age but fail to mature? We end up passing a certain type of frailty down to each generation of successive human beings that look to everyone else to substantiate their existence.
Yeah.
There's no easier way to be miserable than to need that validation. Thin skin is very vulnerable. Like we talked about last time, you've got to be able to transcend the minor bullshit that comes your way. Things like a poop swastika, if that sends you into a need for a safe space, some sort of sanctuary, then you've perhaps lived a very sheltered life for which you might be a little thankful that the worst thing you saw in recent memory was a poop swastika. And many students didn't even see it. They heard about it. The worst thing that happened to you recently was that you heard someone say that they heard from someone else who saw a poop swastika. That wasn't what people were complaining about in the civil rights movement.
Right.
People were complaining about real shit, real things that they could not do that other people had the right to do.
Yeah, real shit.
Real shit. A person's ability to persevere is a measure of the strength of their will and the virtue of their character, not their birth privileges. A person's capacity to endure whatever obstacles are in their way is only diminished by these approval-seeking behaviors.
Right.
People who look to everyone else and to the collective to affirm your sense of self are not standing on a solid foundation. You got to approve of yourself. Then you can operate with conviction in this world. This world that is too busy with its own self-esteem issues to fix yours for you. A racist is someone with massive self-esteem issues. People who don't have self-esteem issues don't have to regard entire groups of people as inferior to them. So we've got people with self-esteem issues offending people with self-esteem issues.
Really spot on.
Yeah, it sounds like middle school.
Yeah. How do we help these people out? That's the question.
The way you help these people out is by treating them like adults. What's been happening at Yale is a result of even less sensible developments. What happened at Yale was in anticipation of Halloween, an administrator sent an email out to students that basically said, we're not going to tell you guys what Halloween costumes you can and cannot wear because you're fucking adults. And it's okay for people to be a little offensive, a little obnoxious, to make decisions in poor taste. These things are all part of a open society and a free society.
Right.
Not a completely free society, but still one with certain permissiveness. And much of the campus has flown into a triggered state because they're saying that people need to be told what they can and cannot wear. And the lack of someone telling you what you can and cannot wear is putting everyone's personal safety at risk. I can't think of anything more childish than people needing to be told what they can and can't wear on Halloween, and then people revolting because they're not getting the micromanaging parentage that they want from their learning institution. What they're arguing for has nothing to do with any sort of injustice. I don't see the grounds for telling people what they can and can't wear on Halloween costumes. One thing you don't do for adults that demand to be treated like children is give in, because then they'll always be children, and you'll always have to treat adults like children. And society will be in a state of arrested development, ignoring opposing viewpoints, attempting to deprive each other of our rights that we expect for ourselves, the dumbing down of academic material to suit political agendas. The rise of this victimhood culture is interesting because the victim now is the bully. People are using a contrived victim status to allow themselves to take power over other individuals. If the world was such a racist place, I don't think the president of Missouri would have had to step down over public pressure. Like, he would just said, hell no, I'm not stepping down. What, are you kidding me? And everyone else in America would go, oh yes, why would you step down? Those people are racially inferior. But our society is generally very sympathetic to people who oppose racism. There are still racists in our society, but they're vastly outnumbered by people who think racism is a regressive modality. They say, I don't want any part of that. Yeah, someone did something racist? Yeah, fuck that guy. The problem is when some of that racism is contrived, and then that platform that we've given to people who have a victim status of any kind of victim status these days, they end up at a bully pulpit where they make demands on other people. They place expectations on society that society might not be able to meet, and then use the inability to follow through on those expectations as further evidence of racism.
Well, we went through all their demands. What if they don't get their way? Like, what happens there?
I think the only thing you can do is nothing. If you don't fulfill the demands, then they're going to lose momentum and fizzle out, waiting for action that's never going to come.
So the only thing that they really have going for them is the attention of the press, essentially.
But they're also excluding the press from many proceedings.
Yes.
And events. So it's not even necessarily that they want to be able to they want the press that they can control,
right,
and that will be sympathetic. Really, if there's any part of these demands that are worth implementing for their actual effects, then implement them because they have positive effects. Don't implement them because you don't want to lose football money.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big draw with colleges, apparently, is old American pastime.
Yeah. And so the Missouri football team won't play football because there's a poop swastika in the bathroom. They'll continue to play even though the universities are making millions of dollars off these kids and they're not getting a cent. They're getting an education, but they're not getting any part of that profit that these universities are making off of them. To me, that's a larger deprivation and a more systemic problem than poop symbols, cave art.
Well said.
This is a man's world. This is a man's world.
Do you think that men aren't what they used to be?
I don't think anybody's what they used to be. I don't think the world is what it used to be. And you'll see a corresponding shift.
Women always go, and my girlfriend said this the other day, whatever happened to men?
Oh yeah, what did happen to them? I know what happened. We have been devising machines for centuries, increasingly complex machines to save labor, to increase the speed of life, the speed at which things can be done, the scale at which things can be done. And a lot of what has been lost with these labor-saving devices is male labor, which in most ways it has actually helped make a more equitable, free society, that people don't have to spend so much time in fields doing agricultural work. They can do more consciousness-based work or thought-based work, cerebral stuff that benefits all mankind. Man has lost his place in the world because he used to do all this brawny shit, and now machines are doing those things, and men are left with the anatomy of brawn and might, but not the responsibilities befitting their biological advantages. So men are kind of having an identity crisis because the world doesn't need the same things from them as it used to, and we're learning how to provide them on the fly.
Aren't there more women in the workforce now?
There are more women in the world. There are more women in the country. There are more women voting. I'm not sure if it's more. There are more women in the workplace, but there's more women in college. I don't see why there wouldn't be more women in the workforce if they're not.
Why are there so many more women than men?
Well, you can't control the
X and Y
sex of your
chromosomes.
child. Yeah, so it could be biological. It could be environmental. It's hard to tell. All we know is that women are a majority at this point. That's not necessarily going to be a bad thing for men, because in the past, women were highly valued because they are the limiting factor in the growth of their community. If you have 10 women and 1 man in your community, you can have 10 kids at a time. Those 10 fetuses can have 10 more fetuses, and your population expands rapidly, which was good 1,500 years ago or so. If you had 10 men in one community and only 1 woman, you could only have 1 child at a time, and that community would suffer. Societies that have been predominantly female, it's not like men have a hard time adjusting and living just because there's more women.
Yeah.
It has more to do with the loss of man's occupational identity that he had before the Industrial Revolution, and it's the consciousness shift is slower than the technological shift. We need to update notions of masculinity from where it was all about, fighting and dying and sacrifice and might, doing things by force.
Can you see that?
No, what is it? Looks like a vagina.
It says, I finally met my fave feminist after 2 years of FaceTime. # kill all men.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's amazing how that's like...
Yeah, there's a large segment of vitriolic feminists, but
Anyway.
it's also unfair to judge all feminists based on the actions of the lowest common denominator, which I think that type of thinking is. Anyone who, even ironically, uses a hashtag campaign with kill all, fill in the blank, I think that's pretty low level humor, if that's what it is. Or if you're serious, it's low level humanity in general.
While I was driving to New Mexico, can't thank you enough, by the way, for all the tunes and comedy you gave me, because I sort of had my iPod stashed away, and I don't know, for the past couple of years I've been just using Pandora or Spotify, and while I was driving to New Mexico, I played a few of the playlists, and then ran into George Carlin. He did a bit on feminists. He believes like a few of their arguments, or resonates with a few of them, as far as like men being kind of brutal, but that's not exclusive to them necessarily, because there have been, a lot of crazy female rulers who've killed a lot of people. Can't shoot any offhand at the moment, but in a general sense, it is kind of bullshit, because when 2 people get together, man and woman, what does that woman expect of that man? She doesn't expect him to make the world a better place. She expects him to wear a fucking business suit and go to some job that he hates so he could be miserable, and support another kid so he could also wear a business suit in the future and support this ever-growing paradigm of, destruction of not only the self, but, what we're in right now.
The cavalcade of ignorance. But then there's also two things. You mentioned that men kind of have somewhat of a legacy of
Right.
brutality. But that's also because whenever anything brutal needed to be done, who do you think was expected to do it? I mean, it's an easy
Right.
question. And people who did what was expected of them and did it well, they would rise up through the various positions in society. And that's how some of the most brutal people around ended up becoming autocrats and dictators and emperors. It's because they were willing to do all the brutal shit, usually. Not people who inherit that right.
Right.
Of course. There were kings' sons who were very ill-fitted for the role and didn't conquer anybody. But for the conquering brutal sorts, people determined that they needed those things done. They determined that this person was going to do it, and then they gave their power to that person to do those things. So if men have ended up that way, I'd say that's partially a product of what they've been expected to do for all these years. If you need coal, then who's going to go get it? Who's going to strap on the hat, get all ashy-faced, die young? Who's going to do all that brutal stuff? And men have somewhat internalized the idea that they are disposable in society because they're expected to do the dangerous things. They're expected to be willing to die doing them. And then, as such, society treats them as disposable. And men are feeling that. Are you alive?
ZRS Zenith Radio Syndicate.